Thank you very much, and thank you for coming in. Is Professor Mickey, can we hear her?
I don't know.
Same issue, just to check in advance? Perhaps not.
Can we? No. It both links the sound.
Okay.
There seems to be a problem with the sound.
We'll go on anyway, and perhaps if the opportunity comes back. Can I just ask you in particular, and this is why I wanted to bring in Professor Mickey, because just around the behavioural aspect of what Professor Staines there said about the pubs and, you know, the difference between having a meal and not having a meal. As I understood it, one of the big issues around that was actually about impacting the behaviour of people while they were there, that, you know, having a meal tends to keep you keeps you seated rather than moving around the pub. And, you know, is what you're saying, you know, so long as your behaviour has changed, so long as you're seated and distant, that the meal is itself irrelevant, it's the behaviour that's important?
Actually, the largely pubs have regulated themselves. There have been exceptions. There is an issue with a number of pubs in Ireland, and I think we could adopt a model they have in Belgium, where if there is misbehaviour in a pub in relation to COVID, the pub is closed for 14 days and the owner of the pub is fined. Whereas here, it depends on waiting for the next licensing sessions, which could easily be a year or 2 years away.
Yeah, but I think in fairness to some of the publicans, you know, it's not always within their control how every person moves or behaves there at a given time. And I think some of the effort is to try and just keep people seated and stop them moving around as they would have been behaviourally used to doing beforehand. Can I just clarify, just following up on Deputy McAuliffe's questions, is what you're suggesting, right, that I live in Dublin, that I just stay in Dublin unless I have an essential work reason not to go to, or that an essential care reason, but that I don't choose to go on holidays in Louth or Galway or anywhere else because I make a choice to stay within my county, or I'm asked to stay within my county? So you're essentially going back a stage to where we had been earlier, where you stayed within your area for reasons of managing localised restrictions. Is that really what?
Yes, essentially. The restriction would be at county level because that's very easy to communicate. And obviously some sense has to be applied for people who live close to the borders of county and also who live close to the borders of Northern Ireland. Many people in the northern counties cross the border both ways for work and for family reasons.
And I heard your response.
That would be, I think, would be part. It's one of the steps, and it's one of the things that we have done that we might need to go back to.
I understand. And one of the questions, and just following up on the Chair's question, I still wasn't quite clear what is actually suggested by yourself and your colleagues in relation to the management of Northern Ireland and the border issues. Could you just, what do you specifically propose we do in terms of monitoring that?
I think what we do is we work with Northern Ireland. When you look at the figures, the very large majority of visitors to the island of Ireland come through Dublin Airport. Even 2/3 of the visitors from the United Kingdom.
Yes, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. Time is so short, but if you could just answer, I saw that in your note, but if you could just answer specifically, what do you propose to do in management terms about how people, the fact that they cross the border?
We can't. We cannot close the border. It is not possible. So we live with the systems we find ourselves in. If we have clear messaging, if we have responsible behaviour on the part of people involved, we can deal with problems as they arise. But there is no way to close the border between north and south, and my view is it's most unlikely that it will be possible to close the border between the rest of the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland.
I agree, and I think that's
in any circumstances.
I'm sorry, I totally agree, and that's just one of the practical problems with trying to implement something like this. It is a genuine practical issue about that has always been the case. Can I just ask you quickly, just in relation to you have a section there on the vaccine, and obviously there's been extremely interesting progress so far, and yet you can't in any way come to rely on it or hope too much. But in terms of treatment, can you talk to us about treatment and the advances in the treatment that we've seen of COVID and the effectiveness of that, and whether that may be a countervailing balance of some kind to the development of a vaccine or delays in the development of a vaccine?
Treatment is not my specialist area, but my understanding is that the treatment of people who are severely ill with COVID has been substantially improved by the use of dexamethasone. and by what's called proning, which is nursing someone essentially face down. It improves their ability to ventilate for reasons I don't understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know it's not your speciality. I think there's some very interesting studies by Paddy Mallon and others, but it's...
Yeah, they're fascinating.
It's fascinating.
But that doesn't address the question of long-term side effects. And one of our real concerns about this virus is the increasing evidence of long-term side effects in people who have perhaps often not been very seriously ill with it.
Yeah, that's
They're
something
left
that the
quite
committee
disabled afterwards.
That's something the committee has discussed actually with Dr. Nabarro in some detail also. Do I have any time left, or am I done?
Not really, but you're
We'll
free
leave
to
it
come back
so.
in at the
Thank
end.
you so much. Thank you.
I think our link is working. Can we, Professor Hennigan indicated he wanted to come in. Can we go to him?
Yes, can you?
Yes. Great, yes, we can. Hallelujah.
Yeah, there were just some early questions about definitions, so I pasted the definitions back in, which are the WHO, where we work. I'm an advisor on transmission dynamics for them. What we're talking about is reduction to zero of the incidence of COVID in Ireland. But then what I hear is many of the policies that are fudged around the edges. The key is if you go for elimination, and you look at what the strategy is, you're talking about border quarantine, 14 days, isolation facilities. You're talking about many more clear policies to get down to zero. And then when you have a period of zero, you open up. And that's what New Zealand's policy is. Remembering out there are 30 or 40 other circulating pathogens at any one. It really is a very complex issue, respiratory pathogens. It is, people are coming with very simple proposals to say, we're going to have a zero policy. Oh, but okay, you can have sort of non-essential travel. If you go down that line, you have to be very clear. That's why I said the definition has to be clear, and your policies have to say they follow a path to zero. And that's what people are talking about, but you can't then fudge it. Once you allow anything else, you're talking about mitigation. You're talking about management. Second is some of the evidence you've just talked to. For instance, admissions to intensive care units have gone down from 12 to 4%. People going on ventilators has gone down from 90 to 20% in England, and survival has gone up from 50 to 80%. So there's been a radical change in outcomes in the 3-month period. So I think it's about being clear, and then if you're clear you want elimination, you have to have a very clear, hard-hitting policy to get to zero. If not, it is not elimination. Thank you.
Could I come in also to reply to the behavioural questions?
Yes, please.
Thank you. So the question was raised about meals versus not meals, and other questions have been raised in relation to behaviour in terms of non-essential travel and how people would respond at borders and test, trace and isolate. Now, in all these situations, there are 3 things that need to be in place. People need to have the knowledge of what they are and not allowed to do. And for that, there has to be very clear, consistent information provided to people. Secondly, they need to be motivated, and I'll come back to that. And thirdly, they need to have the opportunity to, and use of environment is extremely helpful in terms of supporting behaviour change. So in terms of pubs, yes, the meals versus not meals, absolutely, as was suggested. If you have people sitting down and those seats are spaced, then you're much more likely to have social distancing than if you have people moving around. The other thing we know is that alcohol disinhibits behaviour. And what we've seen is that with alcohol, even when people have good intentions and are motivated, after a couple of drinks, they forget and they're hugging each other and near to each other and face to face, etc. So the other thing about eating food is it tends to reduce the amount of alcohol consumed and the impact of the alcohol on people's behaviour. Now, in relation to, and I do agree with what Professor Hennigan said about, in order to get to zero COVID, there does need to be very clear, specific, precise policies. But I think the statement that is being presented today is about an idea, and it needs to be followed up with a statement about what those policies would look like. But in all the cases, it is really important to motivate people to take the population with you or with our government, as I said before. And one of the things that have been shown to be very effective in that is really getting people to think about not just themselves, but their families, their communities, their societies. Get people to think about the we, about other people. And so really using a kind of moral leadership to motivate people to comply with adhering to the spirit, as well as, if relevant, the law, of what is essential travel, about getting tested when you suspect you're ill, about giving contacts, which is a tricky thing to do often, and also isolating. These are difficult things to achieve, and one needs public health expertise in order to achieve them. And really importantly, when I said you need to have knowledge, motivation, but also the opportunity, if we think about isolation, which is key to this strategy, and test, trace and isolate is key to achieving zero COVID, you need to make sure that people are not disincentivized, i.e. if they're going to lose money because they can't work, they should have financial compensation. If they're not able to isolate at home, they should be offered alternative accommodation. This has been done in those countries that are successful in terms of having kept transmission, community transmission, very low. Even quite poor countries like Vietnam, Kerala, have been outstanding in their achievements, but they've made sure that it's not just about people knowing and people being motivated, it's about enabling and supporting them to do that. I think that's a very important message to really take into all the areas that you're going to be considering.
Thank you.
Thank you.